Hidden beneath the layers of heroic tales and grand battles, there exists a scary side of our history. It's a realm where the most mysterious characters that you've never heard of lurked, shaping nightmares into reality. Today, we're delving into a series of twisted tales that reveal the darkest aspects of human nature.
What the hell?
We'll be uncovering the stories of the most infamous killers, the first of them. Individuals whose names might not be household words, but whose deeds were so shockingly brutal that they would forever change the course of history. Jeffrey Dahmer, often called the Milwaukee Cannibal, is a name that sends fear into people's minds. His story is of an unassuming man whose monstrous acts were hidden behind the doors of an ordinary apartment in Milwaukee, Wisconsin.
Oh, come on, man.
Dahmer's killing spree started in 1978 when he was just 18. But it wasn't until 1991, after a would-be victim's daring escape, that the full extent of his horrors came to light. Police, led back to Dahmer's apartment by the escapee, uncovered a scary scene. They found photos of mutilated bodies and body parts scattered throughout the apartment. The most chilling discovery, perhaps, was a vat of acid that Dahmer used to dispose of his victims. In total, Dahmer took the lives of 17 people, mostly young men of color, luring them with the promises of money or sex, drugging them, and then committing acts too gruesome to describe. Dahmer's crimes weren't just murders, they were a series of horrific acts that included dismemberment and cannibalism. Despite the severity of his crimes, Dahmer's demeanor during his trial was calm, almost disconnected from the gravity of his actions. This nonchalance only added to the public's morbid fascination with his case. Dahmer's first stint in prison was for molestation, a sentence that many argue was woefully inadequate given the severity of his crime. He was later sentenced for murder and met his own violent end in 1994, killed by a fellow inmate. The irony of Dahmer, a man who inflicted so much violence, dying violently himself, is not lost on those who study his life. Violence is never the answer, but why does it feel so good to have learned that? H.H. Holmes, the original horror hotelier, turned a Chicago hotel into what was essentially a DIY torture castle. His story isn't just a tale of murder. It is a narrative of deception, ingenuity, and unadulterated evil. Chicago in the late 1800s was filled with excitement for the 1893 World's Fair. Holmes rocks up to the city.
Oh, yeah.
Not to check out the fair, but to build what might as well have been the inspiration for every haunted house ever. His 3-story hotel was a maze of secret passages, gas lines, trapdoors, dead-end hallways, chutes to the basement, soundproofed rooms, and a collection of torture devices that would make any Gothic novelist grin with envy. Holmes had a rather unique approach to hospitality. He used gas to knock out his guests, ensuring that they were unconscious before he started his demonic experiments on surgical tables. After his dastardly deeds, Holmes disposed of the bodies in the building's furnace. But he didn't just stop at murder. He turned it into a business, selling skeletons to medical schools and running life insurance scams. Ironically, it wasn't his killing spree that led to his downfall, but a financial dispute. Another scammer, feeling cheated, ratted Holmes out, leading to the discovery of his crimes. When caught, Holmes owned up to more than 30 murders. He was hanged in 1996, but his legacy of terror continued to haunt very much long after. There were certain speculations about the real number of his victims and questions about his criminal network. Did he work solo, or was there an entire crew of creepy accomplices? It's like Holmes was trying to set a high score in villainy, leaving behind a legacy that is more scary than any ghost story that I've ever heard of. Ted Bundy, the serial killer with a touch of celebrity flair, wasn't just a cold-hearted killer. He was like a showman in the most morbid theater. His twisted journey kicked off in the western United States, a stage for his unspeakable acts. Bundy targeted mostly college-age women, unsuspecting and vulnerable, like he was casting for the world's worst reality show. But what really set Bundy apart wasn't just his horrific acts, but his seeming love for the spotlight. He was the dark star of his own gruesome show. Initially nabbed in Colorado for kidnapping, Bundy wasn't really one to stick to the script. In a move that would make Houdini proud, he escaped, popping up in Florida to continue his killing spree with even more brutality. Now, here's where Bundy turns into a bizarre courtroom drama character. At his trial, which was basically the pilot episode for televised murder trials, Bundy decided to play lawyer. Imagine a serial killer cross-examining witnesses and going toe-to-toe with prosecutors. It's like a twisted episode of Law & Order. People often speculated about Bundy's mental state and whether his charming demeanor was just a cover for a more serious mental illness, a more sinister one at that.
What the hell?
But these remain just theories, as Bundy never really gave a peek into his twisted mind. To the end, Bundy wasn't just a murderer, he was a performer. He seemed to relish interviews, basking in the limelight and even bragging about his fan base. It's like he thought he was the lead in a horror movie with a cult following. Bundy's story ended in 1989, not with an escape or another tragic headline, but with the electric chair. Even in his final act, Bundy remained a figure of public fascination, like a morbid celebrity taking his final bow. Harold Shipman, or Dr. Death as he's infamously known, is like the dark plot twist in the medical crime drama of history. A once trusted doctor, he flipped the script, morphing from a healer to an agent of death. With an alleged body count of around 250 patients in Greater Manchester, England. From 1972 to 1998, Shipman played the role of the friendly neighborhood doctor in 2 different offices, while secretly dishing out a lethal dose of medical care. His victims, mostly elderly women, had no clue about the danger lurking behind the friendly smile and the stethoscope. What's really chilling about Shipman's spree is the methodical, cold-blooded way that he operated. He was like a real-life villain in a very long, very tragic movie, managing to kill for decades without anybody catching on. It took an undertaker noticing a bizarrely high number of cremation certificates linked to Shipman to raise the first red flags. And what's with all these elderly women found dead in their beds during the day? Despite these screaming warning signs, the initial police investigation fumbled, giving Shipman more screen time for his deadly role. His final act of villainy was trying to forge a will to inherit from one of his victims. Greed, it seems, was his undoing. The victim's daughter, sensing something off about the will, called the cops, starting the unraveling of Shipman's house of horrors. In 2000, Shipman was convicted and sentenced, but he committed suicide in prison by 2004, leaving many families without the closure that they so desperately needed.
Bye!
The theories about how Dr. Death managed to stay under the radar for so long range from his status as a respected doctor, acting as a shield, to systemic failures in both medical and legal systems. Shipman's case is likely a cautionary tale, showing that sometimes the scariest monsters are the ones that are hiding in plain sight, with a prescription pad in hand. Jack the Ripper. Jack the Ripper, a name that conjures images of fog-filled streets, shadowy figures, and a mystery that has captivated the world for over a century. This unidentified killer haunted the streets of London's Whitechapel district in 1888, leaving behind a trail of terror and unanswered questions. The Ripper's victims were all women, all of whom were prostitutes. The brutality with which these crimes were committed was shocking. The women weren't just killed. Their bodies were mutilated in a manner that suggested the killer had surgical or anatomical knowledge. This led to theories that the murderer could have been a surgeon, a butcher, or somebody else who was skilled with a scalpel. What made Jack the Ripper particularly notorious, though, behind the grisly nature of his crimes, was the way that he seemed to mock the community, seemed to mock the police. He sent letters that outlined his horrific acts, taunting those who were desperately trying to catch him. These letters added a psychological element to the already terrifying physical crimes. Over the years, many suspects have been named. The list included doctors, butchers, artists, and even members of the royal family. The conspiracy theories surrounding the Ripper's identity are as varied as they are wild. Some suggest that he was part of a Masonic plot. Others believe that he was a deranged aristocrat. The truth, however, remains as hidden as the Ripper himself. The Ripper's story is set against the backdrop of Victorian London, a city that exists between the opulence of the wealthy and the desperation of the poor. Whitechapel, where the murders occurred, was a place of poverty, and the Ripper's choice of victims, women who were already marginalized by society, added a layer of tragedy to the crimes. Pedro Lopez, also known as the Monster of the Andes, might not be as famous as other serial killers.
What?
But his resume is disturbingly impressive. His dark journey stretched across Colombia, Ecuador, and Peru. And what really sets Lopez apart is his alleged victim count. It is over 300, which seems like he was going for some sort of twisted high score. Many of his victims were tribal women and preteen girls, making his acts even more appalling. The details are beyond disturbing. After Lopez was caught in 1980, police found the graves of over 50 of his young victims. He was then convicted of 110 murders in Ecuador and confessed to an additional 240 in Colombia and Peru. These numbers are so high that they almost sound like he was trying to fill out a sinister bingo card. Despite the nature of his crimes, Lopez barely spent 20 years in prison. released in 1998 for good behavior. A man linked to hundreds of murders got a get-out-of-jail-free card, as if he was playing some twisted version of Monopoly.
What the?
Since his release and subsequent disappearance, there has been endless speculation about where he could be. It's like the world's worst version of Where's Waldo. More than 20 years later, Lopez's whereabouts are still a mystery, leaving behind a legacy of terror.
I know we couldn't trust him.
And a bunch of unanswered questions. It's as if he just vanished, proving that sometimes reality can be stranger and more horrifying than fiction. Anyways, which of the killers above do you find the most fascinating? Let us know in the comment section down below, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more enlightening videos. Until next time, stay safe.